Welcome to the UIUC Talkshow. Our goal with this show is to introduce you to the most interesting people with the most interesting ideas. Today we have a very special guest. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation.
We're happy to talk to you and thank you for making the time.
Yeah.
I want to start with a question that I've always since I learned about Ramanujan, or how do you say it exactly? Ramanujan. Is that he died so young, and because of that, the world looks different because we didn't get to know what a long life he would have had. So if Ramanujan would have lived for a longer time, how would the math field as a whole and even the world look different?
That's a difficult question to answer because we don't know what kind of mathematics he would have created. However, the last contribution that he made before he died was in the area of Mach Theta functions. This is a discovery that no one else would have ever made. There are certain things about Ramanujan's mathematics that are so surprising and so unique that it's hard to imagine that anyone else could have ever created this. So Mach Theta functions were his last creation, and we don't know what the motivation was for creating these functions, and we don't know how his proofs went. We can, for some of the identities that he proved for Mach Theta functions, we can sort of guess what kind of methods he used, but for others, we don't. And this holds true of a lot of his mathematics. So in many cases, and we can prove the results that he stated without proof, but often it's a verification. In other words, we have to know the result beforehand, before we prove it. So how Ramanujan reached that point, we don't know. So although in my work we've proved all the results we think that Ramanujan stated in his notebooks, we still have a lot of work to do because we really don't know how he's thought. And if we knew how he thought, then we could continue on and develop things much further.
So, and since he, died, everything was kind of a mystery. And I remember the notebooks were released and published years and decades later. Mm-hmm. So it just seems that everything would be so much different, especially if it was developed a little more, because since you don't know the proof, you don't know where to build upon.
That's right. And in fact, one of the another unusual fact about Ramanujan's work is that he made great leaps, so to speak. So, for example, in his first letter to Hardy, he stated a theorem about the number of integers up to x that are either squares or can be represented as a sum of two squares. So he gave what we call an asymptotic formula, how many there would be up to an arbitrary large number x. So this was found by the German mathematician, well-known number theorist Edmund Landau, at about the same time. But you see, Landau had a whole century of European mathematics, to reach this stage, whereas Ramanujan made a huge leap. In other words, this intermediate background was not present in Ramanujan's life in India. So he sort of made this great leap forward, over everyone else, so to speak, and reached the same point. So, in fact, Hardy, this is one of the things that really struck Hardy about his mathematics, is that he discovered these deep theorems, but out of the background that he had in India, you would never guess he could, discover such results.
So what do you think happened if you had to guess? Ramanujan, he would say that a lot of it came from revelation, like divinity. He would say that, every equation only had meaning if it came from God. So what do you think happened?
Well, so someone asked him, so how do you prove this result in your notebooks? Well, if the person is not a mathematician or doesn't know much about the mathematics, Ramanujan, said, Goddess Namagiri, gave me this formula in my dreams. So Ramanujan indeed was religious. Did he believe really that, these formulas that he had came from Goddess Namagiri in dreams? I mean, I don't think so, but this is a way of just responding to a question like this. So I'm not, denying his fact that he was religious. Indeed, he was a very devout in his religion. But,
So do you have any guess on why he made such leaps in advancement, knowing his background and knowing that, if anything, people in England or the United States or anywhere in Europe, they should have been able to make those advancements in knowledge. But it turns out it was someone from India with that limited resources. So
yeah, it's just like you're an engineering student and you learn something, in one of your advanced courses in engineering. Now you've had a background to reach that point. So think of maybe you're in the 8th grade, and then you discover something in your engineering course. Rather unusual, isn't it, that you would use what you know as an 8th grader, and then all of a sudden be able to discover something that you would only be able to discover after a few good years of undergraduate education. So maybe I should say a few words about the notebooks that
Please.
Ramanujan recorded his results in, since I've spent a good portion of my life working on the results
you think so?
in his notebooks. Yeah. So Ramanujan, before he went to college in Kumbakonam. So Kumbakonam is a town in Tamil Nadu in southern India. It's I can't remember exactly. I think it's about 170 miles southwest of Madras, or Chennai, as it's now called. And so there are two books that influenced him. One is by Loney, and he borrowed this from a college student, and he worked every problem in it. So it's mainly on it's called plain trigonometry, but it has more in it than trigonometry. In fact, there's work on infinite series in the books. And then he borrowed from the government college library in Kumbakonam Carr's synopsis in pure and applied mathematics. So Carr was a tutor in London, and he tutored students that passed the Tripos exam, famous exams at Cambridge University. So he compiled this list of, formulas, theorems, and mathematics, as part of his coaching duties. So it's one theorem after another in very few indications of proofs. So Ramanujan learned a lot from this book. So he entered the government college of Kumbakonam at the age of 16. We think this is about the time that he started to record his results in notebooks. And I should say he only had 1 year of college education because he wouldn't study anything but mathematics. So at the end of his first year, he failed his exams except for mathematics. And he had a scholarship, and it was discontinued because of his failure of these exams. His family was very poor, and so he had to stop his education. So he worked on his own for the next 5 years approximately, tried to get an education again at Bishaya College in Madras, but same thing happened. He failed his exams after 1 year. So he married in 1909, and his wife was just 9 years old at the time. And he moved to Madras in 1910. And he first had the support of a wealthy mathematician who was a collector in the Madras civil service. Collectors who collect taxes, end up with lots of money. So he was supported by R. Ramachandra Rao for 15 months, but he didn't like being supported without really doing a job. So in 1912, he applied for a job as a clerk in the financial office of the Madras Port Trust. And the manager was S. Narayana Iyer, who actually was one of the best mathematicians in India at that time. He was really a very good mathematician. So he could appreciate Ramanujan's work. So he encouraged, along with the chair of the Madras Port Trust office, who was an Englishman, as you might guess from the colonial rule, Sir Francis Spring. So they encouraged him to write English mathematicians about his work. So he wrote one in London, M.J.M. Hill, who didn't really appreciate what Ramanujan was saying to him. And then he wrote two mathematicians at Cambridge, and they never answered his letter. We know their names only from much later in life, when an English mathematician, Littlewood, accidentally told their names in a conversation. And then he wrote G.H. Hardy. So that was the fourth person he wrote. So Hardy was one of the foremost analysts of the 20th century, great mathematician. So in this letter, Ramanujan stated 60 of his results. And first of all, Hardy just sort of dismissed it as, a lot of people write famous mathematicians, with great results, and they're not so great. But then in that evening, he looked more closely along with Littlewood, whom I just mentioned, and they found that, there were a lot of results which were known and true, but a lot of others that they didn't know how to prove at all, and they thought were probably true. So they invited Ramanujan to come to Cambridge. And first, so after Ramanujan got the letter, he demurred because his family was religiously against him going across the seas. So he was a Brahmin. So if you cross the seas, this means that when you return, you wouldn't be able to go to a Brahmin wedding or funeral or anything of this type. So his mother was greatly against him going to England. So Ramanujan wrote Hardy back with another 60 theorems. And Hardy wrote again saying, you really should come to England to get your talents, more developed. So his mother relented finally, and she had a dream in which she saw her son surrounded by influential mathematicians, and Goddess Navagiri told her she should allow her son to go to England. So he left for England in March of 1914. And it is about this time that he stopped recording results in notebooks. He then began to do research in number theory, more related to what Hardy was doing. And so he was learning new ideas, and so didn't really continue to put results in notebooks. So in other words, the notebooks that he had started about in 1904 and ended in 1914, so over a 10-year period. So before he returned to India 5 years later, he made a revision of the first notebook and added various things to it. So this is the second notebook, and this is the main notebook, really, because it has a number of things in it that aren't in the first notebook. And then there's a short third notebook, which perhaps contains some results that he had before he returned to India. Yeah. So these are the three notebooks. The one that he recorded his results in for about 10 years, and then the second, which we think he probably put together before he returned to India, a revised enlarged edition of the first, and the third one is just short. It has just 33 pages. Yeah. So these are the notebooks. So as you indicated a few moments ago, they weren't published until 1957, when the Tata Institute in Bombay, or Mumbai, as it now is, published just a photocopy edition of these notebooks. Yeah. So so maybe I should tell you about how I became interested in Ramanujan and the notebooks, if that's okay.
Yes.
I was going to ask you.
Okay. So good. So I did my graduate work at the University of Wisconsin,
Right.
and I had never heard of Ramanujan until the fall semester of my fourth year at Wisconsin. So I took a course in analytic number theory, modular forms and applications to modular forms in number theory. So there I learned about the partition function and congruences that are for which Ramanujan is very famous. So I'll just say briefly what a partition function is. So P of n is the number of ways you can write n as a sum of positive integers, irrespective of the order. So let's take 4. So you write 4 as 4, 3 plus 1, 2 plus 2, 2 plus 1 plus 1, and 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1. So 5 ways then of writing 4. Yeah. So Ramanujan discovered some congruences for the partition function. And these have become so useful and have generated an enormous amount of work, and still they have generated an enormous amount of work in present-day mathematics. So suppose you take the number of partitions of 9, 14, 19, etc. So in other words, I'm adding 5 each time. Mm-hmm. It turns out that the number is always divisible by 5, the number of such partitions. So my first one was P of 4 equals 5. Yeah. And there's a similar result for 7 and 11. Anyway, I won't go into any details. So I learned about these facts in this course, and mathematicians also want to know how fast functions grow. So in other words, if n becomes large, how big does P of n become? Yeah. So there is a famous method called the Hardy-Ramanujan circle method, which Hardy and Ramanujan invented while Ramanujan was in England. And with this circle method, then Hardy and Ramanujan got a very nice asymptotic formula for the partition function. And this circle method is used today widely in number theory. So again, it has an enormous influence in number theory. You can hardly pick up a paper in analytic number theory. Well, maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it's used a lot. Yeah. So these two facts I learned, these two topics I learned in the course in analytic number theory. And then my first job was at the University of Glasgow. And my mentor was Robert Rankin. And Rankin was Hardy's last PhD student. And he long had an interest in Ramanujan. So I remember talking with him in his office one day, and he told me about Ramanujan's notebooks. I had not heard of them before that time. And he had the Theta Institute's copy in his office. And he said to me, I'll be glad to loan these to you if you wish. I told him I wasn't interested. So, big mistake. One of the biggest mistakes I ever made. So anyway, what happened was that in February of my year in Glasgow, I got an offer from Paul Bateman, the head of the mathematics department at the University of Illinois, to come as an assistant professor. So I accepted the offer, and it was in my second or third year here that Bateman asked me to referee 2 papers that he had received to referee. So, if you're famous and you're head of the department, you don't have much time to referee papers. So, he gave them to a junior faculty member. So these papers were by Emil Grosswald, and they were, in these papers, he proved some formulas from Ramanujan's notebooks. So, I read the papers and accepted them, recommended acceptance. I didn't think much more about it. But then I had my first sabbatical at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton. So this was in 73, 74. So in February 74, I was working on what are called Eisenstein series, and I suddenly discovered that I could prove all these formulas that Grosswald had proved from the notebooks by using my results. So this is a wonderful revelation. I was really excited about this, that I could prove these formulas of Ramanujan. So the Princeton University Library had a copy, the photocopy of the notebooks. So I checked them out. Found a couple more formulas I could prove, but a few thousand others I couldn't prove. So it was a marvelous discovery. And so when I came back here, I didn't do anything for a couple years, but then in the spring, at the end of the spring semester, 1976, I said to myself, let's try to prove all the formulas in chapter 14 of the second notebook. So this is the chapter in which the formulas that Grosswald had proved are found. So I had a head start since I had proved some of these results. And I sort of just took this as a personal challenge just to see what I could do. So there are 87 results altogether in this chapter. So I worked on this for over a year, and I had a lot of help from my first PhD student, Ron Evans. There were a few results that he proved that were really tough to prove, and so I really owe a lot to him. So I hadn't planned to do anything more, but then just as I was sort of completing that chapter, George Andrews visited, and he told me that when he found the lost notebook of Ramanujan at the library at Trinity College, Cambridge, he saw that the notes that 2 British mathematicians, English mathematicians, had accumulated in their efforts to edit the notebooks back in the late 1920s, early 1930s, had been preserved there. So I thought, well, if I had a copy of these notes, maybe I could edit further chapters. So when I say edit, this means if a formula is known, then it's sufficient just to say who proved it. But if a formula is not known, then it's incumbent to prove the result. So I wrote Trinity College Library, and they kindly sent me a copy of all these notes. So I then went back to the beginning of the second notebook, and then worked my way through, with these notes being very helpful in certain chapters. And then I had a number of PhD students, and they helped. And so to end the story, so after 20 years, I completed the editing of the notebooks.
20 years.
And so as I did this, I sort of gathered the results in books. So I published 5 volumes then on the Ramanujan's notebooks altogether. And the 5 volumes contained, mostly, but not entirely, the papers that I wrote along the way in these 20 years. And again, most of the papers were co-authored with my PhD students at that time. So, that's roughly my summary of my work in the notebooks. So I should have mentioned that after Ramanujan died, I sort of skipped one detail. Hardy strongly urged that the notebooks be published and edited. And it wasn't until 1927, 7 years after Ramanujan died, that his collected papers were published. That is, his published papers were brought together. And the London Mathematical Society was not in good financial condition at the time, so they didn't do anything with the notebooks. But 2 English mathematicians, B.M. Wilson and G.N. Watson, started to edit the notebooks. And Wilson worked on this project for about 5 years, but unfortunately died of an infection that he got in a hospital. And Watson worked on this for close to 10 years, but so they never finished it all. And these were the notes that I got from Trinity College, Cambridge, that they had accumulated in their efforts to edit the notebooks. So I owe a lot to Watson and Wilson as well. So it's very fortunate their notes were preserved.
What are some lessons, like you said you spent 20 years getting those notebooks published, right?
Mm-hmm.
So obviously you learned a lot of mathematics while you're making that, but what are some other things that you learned from his life that you found to be useful and applied in your life?
Okay, well, hard work. Ramanujan did mathematics under not the best circumstances. He came from a very poor family. His father was a clerk in a cloth merchant shop. I think his salary was 20 rupees per month. I don't really know.
It?
Yeah. And the family was poor, and as I indicated, and so they took in boarders from the government college of Kumbakonam, where Ramanujan was a student for 1 year. And I visited that home, Ramanujan's home, in 1987. It is a small home, and Ramanujan had 2 brothers. There were 6 children altogether, but 3 died in infancy. That is, Ramanujan's mother had 6 children. Ramanujan was the first. And so he had 2 brothers as well. And I think other members of the family were living there as well as, students. So, it's sort of remarkable that Ramanujan could, do mathematics in a setting like this. And so that was one of the great experiences of my life, to see Ramanujan's home. And it was his home, evidently just the way it was when he lived there. The only indication that this was Ramanujan's home was that the family took a picture of Ramanujan from a local newspaper and cut it out and taped it above the doorway. And that's the only indication that, this was the home of India's greatest mathematician. Ramanujan worked under not the best circumstances at all, so I guess working hard is what I had to do. So maybe he was an influence there. Because I was so involved with his mathematics, it was natural, I think, for me to learn about his life and the conditions in India under which he lived. So I've developed then a historical appreciation, so to speak, for Ramanujan, and so I became very much interested in his life, and so in fact I've written about this, especially with Robert Rankin, who was my mentor in Glasgow. And,
How can we create more of these like humbling experiences? Like today, I would say, like I'm sure like knowing this and like visiting his home, it gave you like even a deeper appreciation for mathematics as a whole and for that person, right? And that can make you like so much more passionate about the subject that you've been working in. So how can we create more opportunities where students today can like look up, like find people to look up to, and then sort of like get the context and the perspective of understanding why they're learning what they're learning and how important it is, like the fact that someone came up with it, and the fact that it works in real life. I think, how do you create that sense of wonder or like curiosity in students?
And also maybe talk about the experience once you held the chalkboard, maybe, or I forgot.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have two questions there. Yeah. So I think you have to go back to the roots of the subject and learn about the discoveries that motivated what you know now or what you're learning. So then I think you can obtain a better appreciation for what you do. So I certainly obtained a better appreciation for number theory going back to Ramanujan and his discoveries in number theory. So getting back to answering your question about the slate. I should have mentioned that when Ramanujan was a student, at that time in India, students didn't write on paper. Paper was expensive. They wrote on slates. They did all their work on slates. So Ramanujan did all of his mathematics on a slate, and then would record his results in notebooks without proofs. In other words, he would just state the final result in each case. And so this is what I've had to do in these many years, is to prove these results that he stated without proof in his notebooks. So, the slate, we have the slate. It exists because of the following. So I mentioned that S. Narayana Iyer hired him as a clerk, and he was an excellent mathematician. And in fact, they often, after work at the office, would go home and they would work on mathematics together until the wee hours of the morning, and then go to work the next day. So Ramanujan had an affection and appreciation for Narayana Iyer. So just before Ramanujan boarded the ship to go to England in March of 1914, they traded slates. And this, I am told, is a sign of respect and affection for a person to do something like this. So the slate is in the family of S. Narayana Iyer. So it has gone down generation to generation in the family. So I found out or learned where the family was staying. And so I was taken there by a friend in Chennai and met the person and held the slate. And it was one of the great experiences of my entire life. And so I actually was able to do this twice. I visited the slate twice. And second time, I tried to find mathematics or some scribbling on the slate, but I just couldn't see anything that Ramanujan had done. I thought once I saw a scratch of an integral sign, but I'm not sure about that. But it was a wonderful experience for me. Yeah. So.
Did it feel, like, I guess, like what do you feel? Like, do you feel like the mathematics? Do you feel
Yeah,
magic
it's
or-
just this connection, with a great man in mathematics, India's greatest mathematician, whom I respect and many people respect so much. Yeah, that you held the slate on which he, proved so many theorems. It's just mind-boggling. It's extremely exciting. It's hard to describe my feelings. Yeah.
it's exciting, but also it would have saved you decades of work if he had paper.
Oh, yes, yeah, that's correct. If he had recorded the proofs, he probably wouldn't have discovered so much, too.
You think so?
Yeah, well, he had to write down these proofs. It's hard to say.
Right.
Yeah. So, perhaps I should tell you about the lost notebook. I mean, yeah, okay. So, yeah. So that's another. I always spend another couple of decades of my life. So, Ramanujan wrote to Hardy just once after he returned to India. So I might remark, so he left England in February or March, I can't remember for sure, 1919, returned to India, and Ramanujan died on April 26, 1920, so at the age of 32 after he returned. So he wrote Hardy just once after he returned. And in this letter, he told about his Mach theta functions, which I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation. And so he asked questions about theta functions that no one would ever think of asking, and then came up with the question, suppose you have another set of functions, like Mach theta functions, they have the same behavior as theta functions. Are they really theta functions? And he says no. There are what he calls Mach theta functions, and then he gives some examples. So they have properties of the classical theta functions, but they're not theta functions. So Watson studied this letter. In fact, when he was president of the London Math Society, gave his farewell address, so to speak, on these Mach theta functions of Ramanujan. So nothing more was really done after Watson's work. And then, as I mentioned earlier, George Andrews visited Trinity College, Cambridge. And Lucy Slater, who is a well-known figure in what are called hypergeometric functions, she suggested to George that he might find it interesting if he goes to the Trinity College library and sort through the papers of Watson. Maybe he'll find something interesting. So he did that, and while he was sorting through these papers, he found papers of Ramanujan. In fact, I can't remember the exact number of pages, I think 158 pages in Ramanujan's writing. And Andrews had written his PhD thesis on Mach theta functions, things connected with Ramanujan. So he knew Ramanujan's handwriting, and he saw immediately, that this came from the last year of his life. And in fact, he is about the only person who could have recognized this. No one, in fact, I wouldn't be recognized this because I wasn't familiar at that time with Mach theta functions. So he called this Ramanujan's lost notebook, although it really wasn't a notebook and it really wasn't lost. The librarians at least knew about it. Yeah. So then Andrews worked on this lost notebook, which wasn't published until 1988, just in photocopy form. Over the years, and then when I was finishing my work on the regular notebooks, in the late 1990s, I said to George, why don't we, work completely on the lost notebook and try to prove every result in the lost notebook, just like I did with the regular notebooks. And he said that would be, would be great. You think it would take more than one volume? And well, we completed the work in a little over 20 years, and it took us 5 volumes actually to complete proofs of everything. Yeah. So the question really is, how did this lost notebook ever get to Trinity College, Cambridge? So I think we can actually trace it. So after Ramanujan died, Francis Dewsbury, who was the registrar at the University of Madras, wrote to Hardy and asked him about having a notebook. He had heard that Ramanujan had left a notebook with Hardy. And so he asked Hardy to send it to him if he had. And indeed, Ramanujan left his first notebook with Hardy. He had taken with him back to India only his second and third notebooks. So Hardy returned the notebook, and then in another letter, Dewsbury, again it was in 1923, sent to Hardy a pack of miscellaneous papers. And we think the lost notebook was contained in this packet of miscellaneous papers. We don't know because there was no a list of the papers that Dewsbury made, and Hardy didn't make a list as well. So we really don't know what was in this packet of papers. But we think the lost notebook was there. And then sometime, maybe in the late 1930s, Hardy passed it on to Watson. We think it was that late because when Watson gave his presidential address in, I think, I'm not sure the exact year, it was in the early 1930s, I think. He said, here's a Mach Theta function, and surprising, Ramanujan didn't discover it. Well, if he had had the lost notebook at that time, he would have seen Ramanujan did discover it. So evidently it was later that when Hardy gave Watson the lost notebook. So Watson was a professor of mathematics at the University of Birmingham during his career. He died in 1965, and after that, his widow was visited by Robert Rankin. So Rankin had actually succeeded Watson as the professor of mathematics at the University of Birmingham. I should remark that in those days, there was only one professor of mathematics.
Oh.
Only one person had that title.
Like in the entire,
And the others were instructors or something, but they weren't called professors in those days. Yeah.
Why is that, though?
That's just the way the English system worked. It was only later that under pressure, I guess, from others who were, considered themselves, and rightly so, also good mathematicians or physicists, historians, as the case may be. The same was true in other departments as well. That they lobbied to get recognition. Rankin then visited Mrs. Watson, and so they discussed what are we going to do with all these papers that Watson had left behind. And Watson never threw away anything. He had an attic office, and the attic office was covered to about a foot of papers. Yeah. So as Rankin and mathematician Whittaker explained it, you can make a dip into this, mass of papers. You might get some mathematics, but you might get his income tax return from 1923 or something like this. It was just a huge jumble of papers. So over a period of 3 or 4 years, Rankin, who became professor at the University of Glasgow when the professorship opened up there, he was a Scotsman, so that's why he took the professorship in Glasgow, leaving Birmingham. He would take periodic trips to Birmingham, sort through all these papers, and he did this over a period of over 3 years. And in December 1968, he shipped this shipment papers of Ramanujan's papers to Trinity College, Cambridge. Watson had been a fellow at Trinity College and had always had a fond recollections from Trinity College. So this is why Mrs. Watson and Rankin then decided we'll send the papers there. So Rankin didn't say anything about this to anyone. So there the papers sat and until about 7.5 years then, before Andrews then rediscovered them. So Rankin said later he wasn't very fond of calling the set of papers the lost notebook, because he said it wasn't the notebook and it wasn't lost. I mean, he knew about it, and so. But anyway, if I were Andrews, I would have done the same thing. In view of the fame of his earlier notebooks, I would have also called it Ramanujan's Lost Notebook. So yeah, I spent then 20 years or so of my life then with Andrews, and so a lot of the things that he worked on that he was better at, and things that I worked on was more towards my interest. So we got along very well in this collaboration because, we each had our joys of what we liked best, and so, although I like everything that he did, and I think the converse is true, but there was a very good collaboration. So that was another 20 years of my life.
So this 20 and 20, this 40 years, this decades. It all started with Hardy replying to Ramanujan's letter.
Right.
Without that reply, nothing would have.
That's right. If Hardy hadn't recognized these greatness and these results that Ramanujan had told him, it would, we would have lost it. And it could have been that Watson's papers would have just been incinerated, without Rankin going there and sorting through them. So Watson was not careful in keeping these papers at all of Ramanujan. They were just, strewing around his attic floor office. So they could have been lost there. I mean, we're very fortunate that, the lost notebook. And there were other papers of Ramanujan that were there in Watson's office as well. So in other words, this shipment that was made in 1923, we think contained lots of other things of Ramanujan. So these were also published in 1988 with the Lost Notebook. So in fact, Andrews and I covered all of this in the work that we did. So in some cases, they were just sort of scraps. In other cases, Ramanujan maybe started to write a paper and he wrote a couple pages. And so.
Throughout your life, Ramanujan came to you in a way, and in your grad school, and then later, and then the other PhD student of Hardy, he offered you the notebooks, and you said no, and said no, and said no, and said no, but somehow he came back to you. So what do you think is the role of luck, or you like physics, so it'd be randomness, or whatever you want to call it?
So there were a number of pieces in my getting to the notebooks. And I thought often, one of these links, one of the links, could have not been there. So, so at the University of Wisconsin, in the spring semester, my third year there, I took a course in modular forms because I had heard that they use a lot of complex analysis. And I thought I might write my thesis in complex analysis. So that's the reason I took the course. So modular forms are, one subject within number theory. In fact, in contemporary number theory, they played a huge part in number theory. So I enjoyed the course so much that I asked the instructor, Rod Smart, to be my thesis advisor. So then that enabled me to get to, if it weren't for that course, I took this course from Marvin Knopp in the fall semester, my fourth year, on modular forms and applications to number theory. And that's where I learned about Ramanujan. But that was a very important link as well, because Knopp was a student of Paul Bateman, who hired me here at Illinois. So when I got my PhD, after my 1 year in Glasgow, I intended to go to a small college and teach. I did my undergraduate work at a small liberal arts college, Albion College in Michigan, and that was a very good experience for me. I enjoyed my teachers in mathematics and physics, and it's because of them that I went to graduate school. But I decided to accept this position at Illinois. So what happened was that Knopp encouraged me to apply to Illinois. So just to make him happy, I said, okay, I'll apply to Illinois, even though I had no intention of coming to Illinois at all. And because I was going to go to a small college. I had interviewed at a couple of small colleges and had gotten offers before I went to Glasgow, but I wasn't really happy with the colleges from which I got offers. So I was a bit in an unsettled position when I got this offer in February of so it would be, I have to go back in my years, so it would have been February of 1967. So I said, well, I'll come to Illinois for a couple of years. And it was only because, Marvin Knopp, my professor at Wisconsin, said I should apply in Illinois. So that's another link, from Smart to Knopp to Bateman. And then he, asked me to referee these papers of Grosswald. So if he hadn't done that, I wouldn't have, learned anything about Ramanujan's notebooks at all. Because I declined the offer in Glasgow. So, all those, were, necessary links and in my life. So.
It's real funny how that works. Even you mentioned the University of Illinois too. You weren't interested in that initially.
Yeah.
Then with you, and even Ramanujan, you discredited that first too, and then came back. So.
Yeah. Yeah. I should also mention that when I applied for graduate school, I applied at 4 places: Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, and Purdue. And Michigan and Illinois rejected me.
Oh.
So I got even with Illinois. I came back here, and they had to put up with me for 52 years. And so that's what you get when you reject me.
Yeah.
I got even with them. So,
I think 52 years is not a...
I taught here for 52 years. So.
And you're still here.
I've been retired now for 3 years. Yeah. I sort of feels like a long sabbatical, actually. So I still, do research, and most of it is motivated by Ramanujan's work. So.
Which I'm sure. What are you? Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I do a lot of work with my former student, Atul Dixit. So he's at IIT in Gandhinagar. So,
IIT?
Yeah. So, it's Indian Institute of Technology at Gandhinagar, I guess is the official name. So, yeah, I do a lot of work with him and his PhD student. Well, he just graduated, Rajat Gupta. So we've written 3 or 4 papers together. So, and I only have had 2 Indian students. Amita Malik is my other Indian student. So she just began a tenure-track position at Penn State University. So I was very pleased she got a good position.
Surprisingly, Ramanujan isn't even though he was an Indian mathematician, he isn't celebrated in India, as in,
Yeah.
like he isn't getting the amount of attention or respect that he deserves, which is
Yeah.
like we talk about these Western mathematicians, right, all the time, like Newton or like Leibniz, or like we don't learn much about Ramanujan, which is surprising.
So you think in India you don't learn too much about Ramanujan, but isn't he very famous though? Because I mean, in my travels throughout India, yeah, he is really revered, and you're right. Maybe they don't know much about his mathematics, but he's revered, and his birthday and anniversary of his death are observed every year. And in recent years, on the last few decades, there are many more people in India who are working on things connected with Ramanujan's work. So, in particular, in the Mysore area, there are lots of people that have had a lot of students, and they're in Mysore and colleges near Mysore. So they're and in Chennai, there are a lot of people interested in Ramanujan's work as well.
If you were to meet him today, what would you ask him?
I would have so many questions I couldn't begin. In the work on the regular notebooks, I have so many questions. So I'll just mention one area. So there are theta functions which go back to Jacobi, and they're just very central in number theory. And I talked about the Mach theta functions, but there's another direction in which Ramanujan went. So the theta functions have squares in the variables. So let's say q to the n squared, or n is a summation factor. So these are sort of thought of to being quadratic functions. And anyway, Ramanujan had the idea, well, maybe there's a cubic theory of theta functions. And he developed a cubic theory, and then he developed a quartic theory and fifth order theory, and then showed how you could. They didn't go into it, maybe an nth order. So this is a direction that I can't see anyone ever going into. If it hadn't been Ramanujan, I can't imagine anyone would have ever said, well, suppose there is a cubic theory, and started proving theorems there. I would ask Ramanujan, why did you think there might be a cubic theory? And how did you see these Mach theta functions? Why did you think these functions were interesting? How did you discover them? I have lots of questions to ask him. I would also ask about his personal life. In other words, how did you keep going in the years, after your departure from the Government College of Kumbakonam to, 1910, when he finally got support from Ramachandra Rao. He ran away from home once, and it appears he had dysentery twice while he was before he went to England. In fact, many people in the medical profession think that this is how he died. So if dysentery is not treated properly, the amoeba could be in your, large intestinal area for a long time and not disturb you. But if your life is somehow changed, then, as Ramanujan certainly was when he went to a colder climate in England, then the amoeba could act up, and then they would, if you're not treated, they would kill you. Then. So, many people think, and I am one of these, that this is how Ramanujan died, because dysentery was not treated properly. Others, including the doctors in England, some of the doctors in England, and when he returned to India, thought he had tuberculosis. So I think one of those two are probably, there were other diagnoses that were made as well. So I see, how did I get to this question? What were you asking? I forgot the train of thought that got me to this question.
We were talking about what you were asking. You said you wanted to ask
that's
about
right.
personal life.
That's right. So I would ask him, how did you survive these years, before you got to Madras and got some support there, and then met S. Narayan Iyer. So, yeah. I talked with his widow, Janaki, twice. So she was born in 1900. As I said, Ramanujan married her in 1909 when she was just 9 years old. And so she died in 1995 at the age of 95. So I fortunately had the opportunity of talking with her twice through an interpreter. So she had raised two, I'll say adopted sons. She didn't use the term adopted, and in India you wouldn't use that term, but she raised these two. What happened is that a couple living in her area had died, so the two boys were homeless, and so she raised these two boys. So one of them took care of his adopted mother in her old age. So he was actually became a banker, and so he served as an interpreter when I spoke with Janaki, and so that was also a very thrilling experience. This link of Ramanujan through his widow, it was very exciting and meaningful for me. And she said, I asked about how long did Ramanujan do mathematics, because he was sick and dying. And she told me that he did mathematics, the way she put it, he was doing his sums. That's what she said. He was always doing his sums, she said. And he was doing his sums up to 4 days before he died. He said the pain had become too great, and he couldn't do anything in the last 4 days. So he was doing his sums up to 4 days before he died.
Maybe that's a number to think about. Maybe it's a secret to one of those proofs, number 4.
Yeah.
Who knows?
He probably had some ideas. He just didn't get a chance to record.
To write it down.
Yeah.
I'm wondering. So someone like Ramanujan, right? He was obsessed with mathematics to the point where he failed not once but twice his college, to the point where he lost his scholarship. And a quote unquote rational person coming from a poor background, going to a college education would mean having a quote unquote better life. But I think that there's something to be said about being that obsessive and being that curious about what he was doing, that he knew the consequences, which he suffered, obviously, because he was, like you said, he was more than a couple years, just surviving somehow. But there's something to be said about that passion, that curiosity, that obsession that you rarely see today, because you have all these pressures to, go to college and do, get this degree in these things. And if you're not doing well in that course, you should study that course and not the ones that you really like. And perhaps that's a reason why we don't see many people like him today. Do you have any thoughts on that, or on how?
Yeah, well, you're correct that because of a lot of pressures on students, from family, friends, or the culture in which they live. You have to get a good job, and etc. That those are pressures, and living with these pressures and concentrating on something else, like Ramanujan was doing in mathematics, is hard. And for him, it was hard. He didn't have a job. He was supposed to be help support the family, and he wasn't doing this. And his father in particular didn't like him, doing mathematics. He should have had a job and contributed to the income of his home. So when Ramanujan did get some money when he, before he went to England, and after he returned from England, he was given some money by the government, and he was, he gave it half to his parents and half to the poor. He, by the way, I guess his father was upset because he didn't give it all to his parents, but he gave it. And particularly, he wanted to buy school books for poor children who couldn't afford books. Yeah. So I think, the pressure, financial pressures that he had on himself because he was not supporting his parents. I mean, he realized this, and so when he had some funds, in particular when he got government funds after he returned from England, he was very careful to, support his parents. And, so didn't keep really anything for himself, so to speak. Yeah. Yeah. So, pressures, often are detrimental, to creativity and maybe doing what you really want to do in life and devote yourself to, to something, give all your attention and to.
Yeah, and there's been some programs, and throughout history, we can see it. In the Renaissance period, you had families that serve as patrons, like the Medici family with, Da Vinci and all those people, and perhaps there's a way we can go back to a system where the really creative people, the people who want to be obsessive about these things, they are kind of taking out of the system, and they can focus on these things, which is, some people have tried. There's this guy who, and he gives $100,000 for 2 years to a student, and usually to drop out of college so he can focus fully on their thing. And so far, big companies have come out. I don't know if you know much about like cryptocurrency, but like one of them came out of those things.
I've read about it in the paper, but I really don't know much about it.
So one of the quote-unquote geniuses was this guy, also similar to Ramanujan in the sense of, he dropped out of college and he just obsessed with economics and computer science, and that allowed him to create Ethereum, which is another one of like blockchain things. And he was able to do that in part because this guy gave him $100,000. Just do whatever you want. And perhaps if he didn't have that, would never happen. Which, it's sad because I'm sure there are many more people like Ramanujan and all these people, but there isn't a system or
an environment.
An environment where they can just be obsessive and pursue their curiosity.
Yeah, and poor environments in our country and many countries, there are undoubtedly many people, maybe not quite as great as Ramanujan, but who could make contributions to society, and we lose a lot of these people because of poverty and the lack of education that's available to them, and finding these people is difficult, and I don't have any there are no easy answers.
Perhaps the only way would be to encourage those people to email people and see how they can get there.
And support, diverse people from diverse backgrounds, in particular backgrounds where they don't have the advantages of people like myself and you. So yeah, it's difficult for admissions offices at colleges and universities to find these people, and
How much do you think they're trying? Are they trying?
it's So I've read a lot about this. Equal opportunity and the fact that, particularly the Supreme Court, might strike down equal opportunity as for students. So colleges and universities, have equal opportunity to admit students, from poor, diverse backgrounds. So, in other words, not just on their, records alone, but considering, the kind of education that they had so the Supreme Court, might say this is illegal. You can't do this. So, this would be tragic if they did strike this down. But on the other, it's difficult, to recognize these people. So it's not easy for admissions offices at colleges and universities to recognize. They make mistakes. That's for certain. But it's a difficult task. You want to try to bring in people that you think are talented, but don't have the finances or the background to that other applicants have. It's
Yes, it's a complicated task.
It's complicated. Yeah.
You have the idea of like meritocracy, where merit, the people who work the hardest should win.
Yeah.
But it gets really messy because it's really hard to understand a person's backgrounds because perhaps their intelligence could not measure in testing. Like I'm sure like Ramanujan would have done really bad in the English section of the SAT, for instance, but really well in the math section.
Yeah,
Perfect score probably.
Yeah.
Would he have gone into this university? Probably not. Because being good at one thing is not
enough.
Yeah, that's right.
So
he wouldn't be accepted here at the University of Illinois unless there were people who, saw his talent and, went to the admissions office and convinced them, this is, a great mathematician. You should, admit this person.
almost like a basketball player, because it's like these days, the athletes are the ones who get sort of the tip. Okay, accept these people because they're good. But perhaps we should have a system where professors can, hey, let these people in or let do that, and yeah, so many things to improve.
Pardon?
Like so many things to improve.
Yeah.
And this idea of talent. But I know I'm very interested in how the internet is helping, equal
level the playing field.
In a way, yeah, and make like people who are obsessive could get even more obsessive. Like I wonder what Ramanujan would have done if he had the internet. He would have read all these things, like unlimited papers, unlimited mathematics. Like all of Euler's works, which is insane, a lot of work. He could have read it in.
But you would have to translate them or have somebody.
Of course.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for someone who's in college, someone's our age, about life, about doing great work, and doing their love?
You spent more than half a century in this college, so I'm sure you have some words of wisdom for us.
That's a tough question. Associate yourself with people that have the same goals and aspirations as you do. So, as you know, there are not all the students here have aspirations or don't work very hard and spend their time in bars and various places. So make sure that your friends, have similar goals. Maybe you have the same religious values that you do. I'm not saying you should be of the same religion by any means, but have the same values. So, then seek out professors and come, ask them to, for an appointment. Most of us who are professors are glad to have students come to their office and show interest in their work. And maybe just like you're doing here, ask them more personal questions as to, how did you, get into your field, etc. So, professors, are for most of us are very pleased to have students come to their offices and show interest in, their subject and, maybe, themselves as well. So, don't be afraid. Also, there are lots of extra, lectures that, I wish I had the time to actually hear. People in other fields. And, some of these, there are lectures which are designed to give to lay people. And so, be on the lookout for these lectures. And if you have time, attend them. They might cause your life to go in another direction, that there's something else out there besides what you're majoring in that might be of interest to you. And so I guess those are the main pieces of advice. I mean, work hard. I mean, that's,
Find your obsession.
You can't just be satisfied working with 40 hours a week. So.
You maybe
As a professor, generally, I probably work between 60 and 80 hours a week.
You still do?
Probably not anymore. I don't, but it's probably 40 or something. But when I was a professor, I in the evenings, I didn't watch television. That's when I did my research, actually. So from 8 o'clock to 11, I wouldn't say every night because I went to Illinois basketball games and things of this type, and concerts. So, I mean, I'm not one-dimensional. I love classical music, and I enjoy Indian music as well. My wife and I belonged to a bridge club for several years. Well, we had friends that played bridge, so I didn't work every night, mind you, and we have children that I coached soccer for several years, my son's soccer team, and but I hardly watched any television. Like a lot of people come home and sit, in front of a television, but. Unless it's a sporting event that I like to watch, like an Illinois basketball game or something, then I was not familiar with any of the popular television shows. Anyway.
Yeah, I think there was some sort of research paper that if you watch television or something, like your IQ goes down for like 15 points or something.
Is that right?
Yeah, I don't know how true it is, but I remember seeing something like that.
I mean, it depends on also what you're watching, though. If you're watching something educational, I mean, who knows? You don't know how they came up to that conclusion.
I haven't read it.
If I knew that fact many years ago, I could, recite it to my kids if they were watching too much television. But my kids all did well, so they didn't watch too much television, I guess. But.
Yeah, I think you'd be surprised. I guess in the environments we're in, as we have 19 years old, a lot of people, they're like, there's this idea of like work-life balance, and that we need to have a balance, and it's like preached upon everyone. And I think I think that's one of the worst things you can tell someone who wants to do great work, because there's no balance. Like there's no such a thing as balance if you're doing great work, because it's actually counterintuitive. Because when you're doing something that you're doing because you really want to do it, that's your balance, doing your thing obsessively. And yeah, you have to work, hard, but also work smart. Like it's not like one or the other, both.
Yeah, so you need to take time out, to enjoy other things in life. In fact, Hardy remarked that Ramanujan could hold conversations in lots of areas. He was interested in politics and philosophy and of course, religion. And Hardy said he could talk intelligently about lots of things. And so he wasn't, studying mathematics, working on mathematics, for every minute of his waking time. But,
do you have any favorite memories from the place you spent 52 years in? About any like favorite memories that you see yourself thinking back and remembering?
Well, I had a lot of very good experiences with my graduate students. So I advised 37 PhD students altogether. So, my experiences with them are probably, so I would say of all the aspects of my work, my advising graduate students is the most rewarding part. So more rewarding than actually publishing books and papers and things. My graduate students are, an important part of my life, and many of them I still have regular contact with, and some of them I admit I've lost completely. I don't know, and particularly those who have left mathematics. And so I mentioned that Ron Evans was my first PhD student, and I'll never forget the time he asked me. We were standing in the hallway, I think maybe waiting for a class to get over, and maybe we're waiting for a seminar. And so I had him in graduate classes, and he was a great student. And so I assumed that he would ask Paul Bateman to be his advisor. So again, Bateman's the head of the department,
right,
and a well-known analytic number theorist. So we were staying there, and he asked me to be his advisor, and I was absolutely shocked that he would, ask me. And so I accepted, and then, I realized it's just a fantastic experience to be an advisor of such a brilliant guy. And he was he was a super guy as well. And his brother was a professional violinist, and he was a violinist. And I loved classical music, so, we had another interest in common. So, he's been a friend of mine for my entire life. And so, that was a very important event in my life, advising him. And so then after that, I had a number of other, 37 altogether students. And so, and I work regularly with a woman in Korea. I had 8 Korean students, by the way, 4 men and 4 women. And so, except for one who left mathematics, I have one, I don't have too much contact with her, but 6 of them I have regular contact with. There. So, and one I've been doing research with for several years. So that's, my students are the most rewarding part of what I have done. So
it's a beautiful answer. Like it shows that you enjoy what you were doing, and I'm sure they learned a lot from what you learned over these years. So
Yeah, and the students have told me about, just experiences with me, not, maybe outside the profession. So I frequently had students over to our home for dinner. And so my wife, Helen, is an excellent cook. She has a master's degree in foods and nutrition, actually. But she wouldn't like me to say that she's a cook because of the master's degree. But anyway, and so I regularly had my graduate students out for dinner and evenings, and so a number of them have said later that these experiences outside the class were rewarding to them, were very memorable, and so I took Amita to a football game once, so she remembers a football game. And, so what I've advised postdocs as well, and one of them I've had contact with her. We correspond with her all the time. She's at actually Penn State, a professor there, and I think she told me what she when she came here at Illinois, she didn't have a place to live, so she stayed with us for a week. So she remembered that we took walks in Meadowbrook Park, and I had forgotten this and didn't remember much about her staying with us a week. But anyway, so it's things like this that former students remember that you wouldn't think would be important in their lives, but we're important, and so.
Yeah, I think we've been able to meet a couple professors and through this talk show, and I think we would agree. I think those experiences, just either going to their houses or just events with them,
Mm-hmm.
and just a different experience that is not necessarily outside. It's outside of the classroom, but it just you get to see them as not as a professor, but as a person, as a human being, which is something. It's like you said, it's not one-dimensional.
Yeah. So, yeah, as I mentioned, I coached soccer for my son's team for a few years, and that was certainly another dimension. I had never played soccer in my life. I didn't know anything about it. But so I came to the first practice, and they said they didn't have any coaches. So they asked me to be a coach. And so I had to learn about the game. So anyway, it was a different experience in my life.
Definitely easier than number theory.
It's not the same as number theory.
Yeah.
But
If what would be the greatest discovery in perhaps in number theory or perhaps mathematics?
Oh, it's an easy question to answer.
Okay.
There's the Riemann hypothesis.
Oh, I've read about that.
Yeah. So
no,
that's
fascinating.
Yeah. So that is the motivation for lots of analytic number theorists, and we're still far away from the solving or proving the Riemann hypothesis. But we make just infinitesimal. Probably these researchers or my colleagues wouldn't say that, but just small bits of progress. And it's if I had one thing I'd want to prove, it's the Riemann hypothesis, and everyone in number theory would say that. Yeah.
Have you attempted it?
I actually worked on things close to the Riemann hypothesis early in my career. So I don't know how. Briefly, there's what's called the Riemann zeta function,
Right.
which is very important in number theory. And a zero is a place where the function is equal to zero.
Right.
So anyway, so there are some zeros that we know of, they're trivial, we call them. They're on the real line in the complex plane. So all the other zeros are supposed to be on the real line through a half. You know, the real part of the complex numbers they're all supposed to be on this line. And we have formulas indicating that lots of them are on the line. There have been lots of computations showing, up to millions and millions are all on the line. But we can't prove it that they're all on the line. So we know that they're between the real parts of the zeros are between 0 and 1. So they lie in the strip. So we try to find areas in the strip, but where there aren't any zeros. But these areas they're close to the line through 1. And they're very close, and the distance between we have these very small regions where we can show there are no zeros, but these are very small regions, so we're a long ways away from showing that everything in the strip from a half to 1 and from 0 to a half is free of zeros. I once proved a theorem about the derivatives of the zeta function, about how many zeros they have as you go up into the strip. But it wasn't a deep theorem, but I talked with a student, Arindam Roy, who's a PhD student of my colleague Alexander Zarescu. And so he maybe got his PhD 5-6 years ago, maybe more than that. Anyway, he was telling me some years ago, he said, did you know that your paper on the derivatives of the Riemann zeta function gets a lot of references? And I had no idea at all. But so it evidently, others have referenced the paper, but it's not an important paper. But so derivatives of the Riemann zeta function are also studied because, trying to get information about the zeta function itself. Right. So I guess people studying the derivatives, as Arindam was doing, they just mentioned, my earlier paper or something. But anyway, but I wrote one or two papers in that direction, but I never had any great ideas at all. So.
Because you still have time, so so you never know.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you do it, write our names at the bottom of the paper once you discover once you prove the Riemann hypothesis.
Yeah. So what about if I prove the Riemann hypothesis?
Just write our names at the end of the paper.
Oh, you want me to add your name?
Yeah, because we remember you.
Oh, okay.
The question. I'm just kidding.
Okay. So
maybe try solving it on a slate. Maybe it'll help.
Okay. If I had Ramanujan's slate, then maybe I could work on it with, with a lot of motivation and gusto. Yeah. So, to the best of our knowledge, Ramanujan did not work on the Riemann hypothesis. Yeah. For one thing, in India, he did not have a knowledge of functions of a complex variable. And even when he departed from England, he still did not have much knowledge of functions of a complex variable. So, there are one or two notes in the notebooks and in the miscellaneous papers that he indicated that he knew a little bit about complex variables. So he learned a little bit, but really none of his papers, well, I shouldn't say that, because in the papers he wrote with Hardy, complex analysis was necessary, but it was probably, that part was supplied by Hardy. So I think we can safely say that the parts where complex analysis were used were actually due to Hardy in their joint papers. Yeah.
I wonder if he understood complex numbers and complex analysis, how his mind, what he would have thought. But I guess we'll never find out. But, yeah.
So yeah, there's an area of mathematics called elliptic functions, for which he has a lot of results in the notebooks. And to study these, you really need to know complex analysis. But Ramanujan studied them and got a lot of interesting results, many, in fact, beautiful original theorems, without knowing complex analysis. I mean, he has made wonderful contributions to the theory of elliptic functions, but he didn't use complex analysis. So, yeah, it's one of the many remarkable things about Ramanujan that he was able to do this. Yeah.
To be concluding soon, we have a section called underrated, overrated. So we give you a topic or a statement, and you say either it's underrated or overrated. There's a fun section.
Okay.
1729, underrated or overrated?
Oh, it's just a beautiful number, and it's one of the most wonderful numbers in the world. It's the least integer that can be represented as a sum of two cubes in two different ways. And should I tell about the taxi cab story? Yes. So Ramanujan was confined to nursing homes in the last 2 years of his stay in England. He was a patient in at least 5 different nursing homes. He was not an enjoyable patient, and I think nursing home owners got rid of him or something. And anyway, Hardy went to see him one day, and upon entering Ramanujan's room, he said, "I rode here today in taxicab number 1729. I think it's a dull number, don't you? And I hope it's not a bad omen." And Ramanujan said, "Oh, no, Mr. Hardy, it's a very interesting number because it's the smallest integer that can be represented as a sum of two cubes in two different ways." And so, Hardy found it remarkable he could come up with that fact, immediately. But it wasn't so surprising because Ramanujan had studied the equations involving cubes. So there's a famous equation of Euler involving 4 cubes. So he was really he had studied special cases of Euler's equation, and he gave these representations in papers he had written and problems he had submitted to the Journal of the Indian Mathematical Society, and said, well, here are some examples of sums of cubes. And so he had these 2 equal sums of cubes, and which were the sums of cubes of 1729. Then Hardy asked him, is there a similar theorem for 4th powers? And Ramanujan said, I don't know, but the number must be very large. That is representing an integer as a sum of 2 different 4th powers.
Right, right.
So, anyway.
The Millennium problems, underrated or overrated?
They're excuse me. They're not overrated at all. They're famous problems. Yeah. So
when do you think we'll get to solving them? Or what will it take?
Well, I'm not an expert on these, but from what I have read, hundreds of years. So, but I can't give you an expert opinion.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I don't. Yeah.
You went to a small college. You went to teach at a small college, and you really like small colleges. And I think you suggested your granddaughter to go to a small college as well. So, but we're in a big college, one of the biggest colleges in the country. So, big colleges, underrated or overrated?
Well, it depends on what you would like to do. So, I came from a rural area. I mean, my parents were farmers, and I went to two-room grade school. And, I did not grow up in a climate where there were lots of people. And I didn't really have a particularly, I had a poor grammar school education. And so, I was never comfortable in large settings. And so a small college seemed to be much more to my liking. And I didn't know, quite what I wanted to do. I didn't have really any particular goal. I loved my physics course in high school, so I just decided I would major in physics. But I never thought of being a physicist or a mathematician or anything. And so, for me, a small college is where I could, develop, as a person and not, need to specialize in just one aspect of education or life. So this is where I learned about classical music. Very simply, freshmen all had to eat in the same dining room. We didn't have the luxury of eating out. We all had the same food. And they played classical music in the background for our dinners. So I learned, I began to enjoy this. And then my future wife, whom I met later, played the violin. And so that's how I became interested in classical music. At a large university, it's doubtful that I would acquire that interest. And the math teacher, whom I had for most of my courses, played the oboe. And I thought, this is what I would like to do, teach mathematics and be involved in classical music. And so, if I were at a large university, I probably wouldn't have found a professor like that, whom, I could go to his office and learn about, and go to his home for dinner and learn about, classical music as well as mathematics. So for me, a small college was the best thing for, that I could do. And, so none of our kids went to small colleges, so never could convince them.
Funny how life works.
So our oldest daughter went up to, I encouraged her to go to St. Olaf and interview up there, St. Olaf's College in Minnesota. She called back and said she'd never want to go to a small college. She hated it. And anyway, so she says all the kids here are blonde and blue eyes. I want to see, no other kids besides blonde, blue-eyed kids. So St. Olaf is a Lutheran school, and its background is Scandinavian, Swedish and Norwegian. Most of the students go there, or at that time, at any rate, had backgrounds, family backgrounds in Sweden and Norway. So there was too many blonde, blue-eyed kids up there, and she didn't want to go there. So.
Last one. The Illinois basketball team, underrated or overrated?
Oh, that's an interesting question to ask. I do follow Illinois football and basketball, it's a big question mark for this coming year. So it's a big question mark. So I don't think they're overrated at all. They might be underrated because there are a lot of good players that they've acquired on transferring in on freshmen. We just don't know about how good they will be, but they might be very good. So, probably underrated. So. anyway,
We'll have to see.
that's right. Yeah.
Thank you so much for spending some time with us and teaching us all about Ramanujan
Okay.
and math, and really good advice that you gave us. So thank you so much.
So I guess my best piece of advice in leaving is to read Robert Cannicle's biography of Ramanujan, The Man Who Knew Infinity.
I was going to ask you about it.
Yeah, it's a wonderful book, and yeah, you will enjoy it. You don't have to be a mathematician to read it. It's for, anyone can read it.
Have you seen the movie?
Yes. In fact, I have a copy of it at home, so I can see it every night if I would. No, the movie is also excellent. Maybe not quite historically true in every scene, but
Some dramatization.
some dramatization, right?
Yeah.
No, but you should read Cannicle's book. That's really excellent.
Actually bought it.
Yeah.
I actually have it at my place, so I'm
Okay.
gonna. I started reading it some time ago. I'm gonna finish it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for watching. We had an amazing time learning more about Ramanujan. Like, even though I'm from India, I didn't know so much about him as I know now. It's fascinating how much you can learn if you just look back in the past. And like the last couple of our episodes have also been, we've done a deep dive in history, and we find these hidden gems, and just learning about them and looking at their hard work and how they live their life, it can teach you a lot about how you can improve your life and how you can think differently, right? You're trying to come up with ideas and finding ways to follow your obsession. So I think this is a great starting point. If you're looking to get interested into a subject, just try finding someone that you look up to and just read about them, learn more about them, and then you never know what you might find out. So yes, keep staying curious and
Visit your professors. Ask to
Yes.
come to their offices and talk with them. Yeah.
They're so close, and a lot of them they want to talk to you.
Mm-hmm. Most of them will want to talk with you, be kind to talk with you.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all there is to it. Keep asking questions and follow your obsessions and never stop being curious. Thank you, and we'll see you guys in the next one.